I'm Gena Glickman, the president of MCC, and I know I have some presidential colleagues in the audience as well. I want to thank everyone for attending this morning's event, and a special thanks to the coordinators of the program and to our sponsor, Rockville Bank, and Jan Terrazzoni for making today possible. I was going to acknowledge some people in the audience, but my husband always warns me that those lists get very long and I always miss somebody. So I'm not going to do this by name, but I do want to let you all know kind of who's here, because I think one of the strengths of what we're doing today is the myriad of sectors that are represented. We have people who have registered from our business community, our advisory boards, adult education, our colleges, faculty, alumni, the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, private foundations. We have legislators. I know Congressman Courtney is here. Our Board of Regents, our chairman and several members of our board, the president of the Board of Regents, Bob Kennedy, who you'll hear from, representatives from Blumenthal's office, from Larson's office, First Selectman, our regional. It's amazing to me, and I'm very, very grateful. I appreciate your all being here today. I'd just like to say a few words to frame the conversation and to get it started. We did a 2008 economic impact study of community colleges that showed that for every dollar a student invests in our colleges, they receive $8.10 in higher future wages. The study also shows that taxpayers see a real return of investment in the colleges at 9%, and that the state benefits as well from improved health and reduced welfare, reduced unemployment, keep our fingers crossed on that, crime, and by saving the public some $16 million per year for each year that students are in the workforce. And our Connecticut economy receives roughly $5 billion in income each year due to the colleges and our students. That's about 2.3% of the state's annual income. So it's critical that as sectors and leaders we must talk about collaboration and partnerships. Our work is interdependent. College completion is part of the equation, and it does remain an important issue, and it's where our partnerships can make a difference for individuals and for the state of Connecticut. But it's not only completion, but completion in disciplines that help sustain an intellectually viable and competitive workforce for the state of Connecticut. So the goal today is to talk about how we can spur economic development and growth, how we can be partners. And it's not just about what training and educational programs we offer at the community colleges. We can be partners in a variety of ways in job creation and economic development. We already provide training in manufacturing and healthcare and entrepreneurship and other disciplines, and I think we need to do more. You know, we have service learning, we have all kinds of things, but we also have creative town, business, and college partnerships. And since you're here at MCC, and I'm not embarrassed to exploit this opportunity, I'm going to tell you about 3 ways that MCC is partnered with others in our community to improve our citizenry and what we do in the state of Connecticut. And it's not just because I have the floor, but really to plant some seeds for further development. You know, clearly everybody knows we've had budget cuts, and one of the areas that we cut was in health services to our students. We actually ended up partnering with ECHN, who will be bringing doctors onto our campus using our nursing suite on campus. That will enhance their medical practices, it will provide a new location for services, and it will provide services to students and staff at very little or no cost. That's one. A second partnership involves MCC on Main. This was a partnership between the town and the College Foundation that was made possible by First Niagara Bank. First Niagara laid off 94 employees on Main Street in Manchester, and the town was concerned about pedestrian traffic and visitor traffic declining and ultimately harming the small businesses on Main Street. We said we could bring students downtown that would not only help keep downtown viable, but have the added benefit of helping us with our increased needs for space. In March, we will open a Main Street art gallery, have 2 classrooms and a seminar room, a location for our entrepreneurship center, a partnership with Real Artways, and we help with the Greater Hartford Arts Council. Adult Basic Education will have their offices there. And that's just the beginning of what we can do. The third example that The ABE brings me to the third example, which is a partnership with adult education to prepare students who have a GED or high school diploma but aren't college ready. This was a partnership brought about by a commitment of legislators who saw a gap in educational opportunity for a particular group of students. Working together with adult education, the Board of Education, legislators, and our colleges, we've put together a program that we believe will make a real difference. These initiatives are possible because people from different sectors of our state got together to explore possibilities and create opportunities. There's a lot of creativity in this room, and my hope for this morning is that we can spur innovation that helps us move ahead in what is still a fragile economy for the health and well-being of our citizens and the state of Connecticut. And now it's my pleasure and my absolute privilege to introduce our governor, Governor Malloy. He's an incredible advocate for education, an avid supporter of our community colleges, a passionate advocate for spurring innovation and economic development. I don't think he leaves any stone unturned. Governor Malloy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gena, thank you very much. It's great to be with everyone. I was more than happy to accept this invitation to be with you this year. I will point out that last year the Lieutenant Governor, Nancy Wyman, was with you, and I was at the Meriden Chamber of Commerce. This year she's at the Meriden Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here. So you got tag teamed at least over a 2-year period of time. Listen, it's great to be with you. This is important work, and I'm happy that our community colleges, actually our Regents system, is so involved in regional economic development. I certainly, although I can't stay for the program, I know that you'll be hearing from Robert Kennedy, who's heading our Regents system, and I know and am extremely impressed by the fact that so many of the Regents are actually here and in some cases visiting this school for the first time as they conduct their tours of all of the system. Now, I want to say a few things. Number one, it's been an interesting year to be governor. We started just a little over a year ago with the largest per capita deficit of any of the 50 states, and we needed to deal with that. That was not a per capita deficit that had developed overnight. In fact, it had developed over the preceding 10 years, and in particular had developed over the preceding 3 years, where people simply ignored and bet on the idea that this downturn in the economy would be just like the other major downturns in the economy since the end of the Second World War, which meant it would be measured in months and not years, and that bet was wrong. And instead of doing some of the things that we needed to do to re-gauge ourselves, what we did was ignore it and borrow money to cover operating expenses, refuse to change our business practices, and refuse to adjust our revenue. All of that had to be done in a relatively short period of time, and we did it. And we did it by going down a road that most other states, 45, 46 other states, refused to do, and that was a balanced approach. I think that balanced approach is beginning to pay off in our state with at least 3 months of declining unemployment, where we are now below the national average for unemployment. Certainly waiting to see later this month what the state statistics will be versus the national statistics that were announced last week. But there is a sense of Connecticut moving, and there certainly is a sense within the broader business community, including some of our largest employers, that Connecticut is actually serious about dealing with some of its systemic problems, beginning with establishing what our means were and then living within them. And I think that's important work. We pivoted very quickly from that session to jobs, but before doing that, we did take the time to reorganize, to a very great degree, higher education, or at least lay the groundwork for a more coordinated higher education system, whose goals it will be to make sure that more of our citizenry actually accomplish their associate's and 4-year degree programs, and to make it easier for them to do just that. Now, I'm happy anytime I'm on the MCC campus, because there is a vitality about this place between its faculty members, including its adjuncts and the students. So you can see it, you can sense it. The place has a special rhythm about itself. It's a great place to be. But we need to do that in all of our systems, and quite frankly, we need to make sure that we're reaching out to all of our students, even in this institution, to make sure that they see a clear road to degree attainment. But there are other things that we need to do within the concept, the broader concept of job growth and coordinated higher education, and for that matter, coordinated pre-K through 12 education, if we're going to compete with the rest of the world, which is something that we have been losing at for 22 years in the state of Connecticut. So what you need to do in these circumstances is take stock of who you are, what your strengths are, particularly those strengths that you have underutilized, and what your weaknesses are, particularly those that you can actually address. I can't change the fact that Florida has better weather than Connecticut, right? But I can help lower effectively the cost of energy by driving efficiency in energy use in the state of Connecticut. So to have a goal that we're the most efficient users of energy makes a lot of sense in that context. There are so many of those situations, so many strengths that we have failed to maximize on, and so many weaknesses that for fear of those weaknesses we have ignored, that's really what I'm trying to get this state to do. I'm trying to get everyone to wake up, shake off the last 20 years, 22 years, and understand that we actually can do this. And I'll point out to a couple of things. I had a conversation out as we were having coffee in the other room with one of the local aerospace companies immediately adjacent to this campus, employs about 110 people or so. It's one of, as I said, one of our 80 aerospace companies. That's not a mistake, that we're a leading state in aerospace. Obviously, it comes from the early work done in the 20s around aerospace. And it is reflective of some of the bigger aerospace companies being here, Pratt & Whitney certainly being one of those, Sikorsky certainly being another one of those, Hamilton Sundstrand being another one of those. But the idea that around that group of people that we can then spur greater than 75 additional companies supplying those entities makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is that so many of those companies concentrated on supplying products for one company, one other company. And in yesterday's Current, you saw a story, and my good friend Joe Courtney is here, who led a delegation to Europe with some of those aerospace suppliers, and a company that recognized $900,000 of additional work that they could do for another company in another country. That's the kind of thing that we need to do. Those bridges are the kinds of things that we need to bridge. I had a conversation with two of the regents just a little while ago, also out in the other room, looking at, and I'm studying this stuff, looking at the comparative efficiency of our workforce here in Connecticut and comparing it to none other than Germany, who is acknowledged to be one of the most efficient producers of precision manufactured goods in the entire world. I got news for you. We beat them. Now, I'm not saying the United States beats them. I'm saying Connecticut beats them. That's why some of those European countries, certainly acknowledging that their own economy may be having some difficulties, are taking a serious look about doing more things in our state directly, that is, buying companies or moving companies here or production facilities, or at least tapping into the high-precision manufacturing that we have. Now, you're going to have a number of people speak about this issue who are much more knowledgeable than I am, but I'm working on becoming more knowledgeable. The whole sense that I want to leave this group with is we can do this. If you don't ignore your problems, if you address them, you can overcome them. And we are starting to overcome them. And higher education, I want to go back to this, and pre-K through 12 is an important part. Over the summer, I made 80 stops as part of my jobs tour. Literally in every one of those stops, I was told about the disconnect between our educational system and the needs of employers. And a point that I make frequently, and some of you who unfortunately have been subjected to hearing me on a repeated basis have heard me say this before. What is most disturbing about the disconnect between education in Connecticut and the workforce is the following. Because we failed to grow net jobs for 22 years, We are a rapidly aging workforce. Now, the quick explanation of that is people tend to stay in the jobs that they're in or the fields that they're in. So that if you're not expanding jobs, you're actually not bringing new people into the workforce on a permanent basis. So you age more rapidly. If you look around this room, there's a few youngsters, there's a few students, but a couple of us are in our 50s. Let's put it that way. That demographic alone can be looked at as a very discouraging statistic, if you want to look at it that way. I look at it in an entirely different way, because I've come to the conclusion that if we did a better job in educating all of our children, whether they've just been born and won't be entering our educational system for 5 years, or in any point of the education continuum between preschool and graduate degrees, if we did a better job in educating and preparing those individuals for the workforce, we could guarantee full employment in this state for this generation simply based on how rapidly we will retire out of jobs. Now, of course, we're not doing that. And in fact, in some of our cities and towns, we're failing 40 to 60% of our students in the pre-K through 12 portion of the system. And there is an absolute mismatch in this state between what we're producing in higher education and what the needs of the business community are. That needs to be addressed in very short order. We need to realign our production to match the needs of the bigger machine, the bigger corporation that we're feeding into, which is the private sector. Now, I know a lot of people recognize that, but we haven't done enough, not that we haven't done anything, that we haven't done enough to make that a realignment complete. And that's where all of our discussions about economic development and recovery must start and must end. Because if we fail to do that, what we're doing is giving out degrees, whether they're GEDs or high school degrees or associate or 4 or graduate degrees, that are more likely to be consumed in another state or, quite frankly, likely to be sub-value. So I'm on a complete drive, day in and day out, to make sure that this realignment is complete. Now, I'll also tell you in this bipartisan jobs bill that we did in October, the only state to do something like that, appropriating $627 million to be fed back into our economy, with literally something in that package for everybody represented in this room, everybody represented in our state government. One of the major things that we did, reflecting that it's going to take us some period of time to realign what we're producing in our educational system, was to allow for credits to employers who add new jobs anywhere from $500 to $900 per month, anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. Because what we recognized in this package was, having failed to produce the right product, we need to entice job producers back into the marketplace, understanding that in many cases they're going to hire people who are not exactly trained for the jobs that they have. Therefore, while we complete this realignment, we subsidize the training of those individuals in on-the-job positions. A weakness which we decided to address in a bipartisan job package which fits very clearly with our ability to compete in the world marketplace. All of which I think I want to leave you with this. I'm encouraged. I believe we can do this. I believe that Connecticut is tremendously efficient, and when its people are unleashed from the burdens that in some cases government has applied, they will rise to the occasion, which is a way of saying we will rise to the occasion. Those of us in government, those of us in the private sector, those of us in the philanthropic arena. We will rise to this occasion. We will make sure that we win this battle. We have awakened, and we shall not lose. And so having a meeting like this on a regional basis or a statewide basis is very encouraging. And the folks that you're going to hear from and their input on these important matters needs to be shared, needs to be understood and digested, and needs to be acted upon. And I can assure you, I have enough energy to act upon them. Have a great day.
that inspiration. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you my new boss. Bob Kennedy has been appointed by Governor Malloy as the interim president of the Connecticut Board of Regents for Higher Education on August 22, 2011. Previously, he served as president of the University of Maine for several years and a number of roles before becoming president there. He's a graduate of University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. I'm not going to tell you when, and his PhD in botany from the University of California, Berkeley. Bob. Dr. Kennedy.
Thanks for your discretion on my graduation date. Thank you very much, Gena, for welcoming all of us here to Manchester Community College. I was particularly impressed by MCC when I began visiting each of the 17 Connecticut state colleges and universities within the Board of Regents. And I have to say, as the governor said, there's a great vitality here in Manchester, and it's truly an example of a community college of excellence. Thanks, too, to William Crawford and Rockville Bank for sponsoring this informative summit. This is the kind of collaborative effort between business and higher education, as Governor Malloy pointed out. And it's exactly the kind of partnership with employers we should be pursuing across the state, and indeed we are. And of course, I want to extend a heartfelt and hearty thanks to the governor, who has made education in general a top priority in his administration, and especially for making the all-important connection between higher education, jobs, and economic development. None more important than what's going on in our community colleges. I'll just say a few words this morning because I know we have an ambitious and important agenda. As Gena mentioned, I'm president of the Board of Regents, which oversees 17 Connecticut state colleges and universities across the state. And those colleges and universities vary in student population, in programs, in specialties, and geographic location, but the common theme among them is that they provide a unique opportunity for Connecticut students who want to further their education. As so many people have told me, as they did last night in Norwalk, as I've traveled around the state, our community colleges are the only higher education alternative for tens of thousands of Connecticut students. At the Board of Regents, we're working in strong collaboration with the State Department of Education to ensure that from the very earliest days of schooling all the way through college, we're giving students the tools that they need to succeed. The idea of keeping separate silos for K-12 and higher education makes no sense in this competitive 21st century economy. In the same vein, I'm pleased to say that we're also reaching out to Connecticut's employers and having those same conversations with them, as the governor urged us to do. What can we do to train, teach, and prepare students to be your employees? What skills do they need? How can we work together? Reinventing Connecticut was a common refrain throughout the governor's jobs tour and the jobs special session. It's truly the future for our state. We have the potential, the capability, and the drive to be a job creation leader. I'm particularly excited about the prospect of Connecticut state colleges and universities and the role that they play in helping to reinvent Connecticut and educate our state students for the global 21st century economy. And I look forward to working with all of you on that. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and for your interest and commitment to this important discussion at today's summit. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Bill Crawford, who's here. It is thanks to Bill Crawford and Rockville Bank that we're able to hold this event. Bill currently serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Rockville Bank and Rockville Bank Financial, and he comes to us after 20 years at Wells Fargo. He's got a very long history of engagement in the community and community events and with community colleges, and so we are very delighted to have him here in Connecticut and very delighted to have him as a partner.
Thanks, Gena. All righty, well, welcome. We at Rockville, we're really excited to be part of this great event. When I think about coming together to talk about how you move the state of Connecticut forward, I can't think of a more appropriate place to do it than a great community college like Manchester Community College. Throughout history, prosperity is directly linked to learning. I know in our own business, I never really worried about what somebody majored in when they come to us at Rockville Bank. I just want to know that they've learned how to learn. And I see people take that and do that so successfully. And I know that's one of the key things that goes on here at Manchester Community College is we're teaching people how to learn, which is how we drive things forward. Today I thought I'd share a couple thoughts with you on the economy and how we're dealing with it at Rockville Bank. A few quick comments on the economy. Did anybody get a mortgage in the last 12 months? Hands? Okay. Did you do better than 7%? If you didn't, see me. We'll work out that for you at Rockville Bank. So what's my point with that? Well, the global capital markets have decided that everyone in this room is a better credit risk than a sovereign country, that country being Italy. Now, that's just shocking. These are some of the things I think about. Usually my day starts, I get up early, go to the gym. I try to do this workout of a 26-year-old, and that workout reminds me I'm really 46, probably headed to 86. And then I go to Starbucks, and I probably do something I shouldn't do. I get a copy of the Wall Street Journal, start reading it. And, when I look at the borrowing rates of Italy, it just blows me away that it's that high. Spain, 5.3% for 10-year debt. Ireland, 7.5% for 10-year debt. Portugal, 12% for 10-year debt. And Greece, 29% for 10-year debt. At Rockville, mortgages, most of the loans we make are around 4% right now. So that's one interesting fact. The problems in Europe are massive, and there's no easy cure. What we have to be careful about in the United States in the next 3 or 4 years is we don't end up in a similar place. And so whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, an independent, I would just encourage everybody to get involved because I think the next 3 or 4 years, the decision we make in this country are going to have a really big impact, and they're very important. Interesting point number 2. What was the most profitable bank on the planet in 2011? Was it Goldman Sachs? No. Wells Fargo? No. Rockville Bank? Not yet, but we're working on it. Now, the most profitable bank in the world in 2011 was the Federal Reserve. CEO Ben Bernanke. How much money did they make? $76 billion. That's staggering. Good news is they gave it back to the taxpayer. But anyway, they have just massively expanded that balance sheet, and that's another very interesting fact. I mean, what you've got going on here, my view of the economy really is you've got these bubbles in asset prices that have developed over a long period of time, kind of like Governor Malloy was saying. They're in real estate, you know that. They've been in private debt. They're in public debt. There's these strong deflationary forces out there, and those strong deflationary forces are primarily this asset bubble collapsing. But demographics are playing into that very big in the United States and in Europe. The baby boom generation, which is a lot of us in the room today, a lot of us are reaching that peak spending. We've already kind of passed that point. We've, have the house, the kids, and whatnot, and we're probably thinking about downsizing to a condo somewhere, and our 401k turned into a 201k, and so we're looking at how do you save for retirement when rates are 1% on CDs, things like that. And so there's this natural deflationary event going on in the economy, and so the Federal Reserve is doing everything it can, and the government's doing everything it can for monetary and fiscal stimulus to try to mitigate the impacts of these big deflationary forces. Now, these could have the cure for this deflationary environment could be tougher than what's actually going on. We could end up with a lot of inflation here if we're not careful. The Fed's stress test. This is what they want the big banks to prepare for. This is not an economic forecast. This is just downside analysis, and I don't think this forecast will come to pass. I think what they're doing here is they're maybe trying to not let the big banks repurchase shares or pay dividends. But anyway, they want banks to prepare for 13% unemployment, the Dow Jones declining 50%, and housing prices, which are down 30% nationally already, declining another 12%. So with all that cheery news, how's Rockville Bank dealing with this? We're a small business, a lot like the folks in the room here. Sure, we've run our stress test and we're ready for whatever the downside risks are. But I'm here to tell you we're just focused on serving our customers and our communities. When we see individuals or businesses struggling during these very tough times, we want to do everything we can to find a solution that works for them. Stay away from foreclosure. We've doubled our number of business lenders. We plan on doubling our number of mortgage lenders. Through this crisis, 2008 to 2011, we've grown our business lending 18% at a compound annual growth rate for the last 3 years, so 18% a year for 3 years. We recently raised $171 million in a second-step public offering. We contributed $5 million to our Rockville Bank Foundation, and we used those funds to reinvest in places like Manchester Community College. We've created 30 new jobs. We are expanding in Glastonbury, Hampton, and West Hartford. In 2011, we eliminated $122 million worth of debt. And even though conditions are very tough in the global economy, we see this as really a time of opportunity. So what's my point with all that? My point basically is there is no silver bullet solution to the challenges in the economy out there. I think like the governor said, it's just we've got to look at things through a realistic lens and make the tough choices. In our roles as head of the family checkbook, CEO of the bank, CEO of the community college, or the governor of Connecticut, all we can do is make informed, sound decisions and go forward with confidence, despite what we might read in the Wall Street Journal. As a nation, I believe we've got to move past the blame game. The truth is, I think everybody probably had some role in this big bubble economy that's going on for a long time. One last point. Let's not forget, we live in the greatest country on the planet. When the world gets concerned about the economy, they all can't come here in person, but they send their money. Sort of what's my evidence of that? The U.S. debt trades below 2% for 10 years. So we're the leader of the free world. We're going to be the group that leads the nations out of this. Connecticut is a very influential and key player in the U.S. So I'm very encouraged that we have so many people here today to work on how do we move Connecticut forward. And I really believe education is one of those long-term strategies. While it's not a silver bullet, it's just so foundational to getting us to where we need to go. Now, I hate sharing all those bad economic statistics without giving you a way to experience some joy. So I'm going to give a shameless plug for the Manchester Community College wine auction, which I'm the chairman of. Friday, April 27th. Okay? You have an opportunity to come here. It's a Friday night. I know we'll have great weather, but we're going to have great wine, great food, and it's an opportunity to do a couple things. One, get to know your friends and neighbors, and then also have a nice night. I'm sure we'll have some terrific wine, but most importantly, give back to Manchester Community College, because I think this is just one of those organizations in Connecticut, particularly Eastern Connecticut, that's going to take us forward. And at Rockville Bank, we're just so proud to be part of what you're doing here, Gena. And thank you very much. Hope everybody has a great day.
Well, now you know why I like to hold this event on my campus. It's my pleasure. I'm your MC for the morning, and we are moving right along. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Wilfredo Nieves, who's going to introduce our keynote speakers. Wilfredo and I have been colleagues for a very long time in Maryland, Connecticut. He's been an educational leader in this community for a very long time, 10 years at Middlesex and now at Capital Community College, a dear friend and a wonderful man. And I would like to welcome you this morning.
Good morning. Good morning. We're not here to fall asleep. We're here to be engaged, to work, to really be proud of what we're doing. I promised not being in my sister's home, not Capital Community College, my home, that I would take the opportunity to make some plugs, but I won't. I do want to say, though, that I'm very pleased to be here. And although my task this morning is to introduce this morning's keynote speakers, I just want to take a moment to digress and to tell you that last year at this event, my task was to be the closing speaker and to summarize. And certainly one of my recollections of my comments really makes me feel so good about today, because I wanted to be sure that that first summit was not going to be our only summit, that this is an ongoing and continuous dialogue, conversation, and engagement with our partners, fully participating as partners. I often look at what's gone on this year in terms of our merger of our systems, and the governor's left, and so I don't mean this in a bad way, but sometimes I think about a shotgun wedding. It really is, in some ways, an arranged wedding, and let me tell you, those things do work. So there's really an opportunity to do some things. Not always, but certainly we're on our way. Let me get back to my task, though. My task today is to introduce the speakers for this morning, and I'd first like to introduce Doug Lederman, who is one of the founders of Inside Higher Education, a leading online source for news and information related to higher education. In his role as editor, he's responsible for many operations at the Inside Higher Ed. Mr. Lederman speaks widely about higher education, and his work has appeared in publications such as the New York Times and USA Today. His presentations have been heard around the country on C-SPAN and National Public Radio. Mr. Lederman was managing editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education at one time, and certainly that's also an important tool for us. But I have to say, and as I was telling Doug earlier this morning, that I start my mornings every morning with a cup of coffee and online looking at what he said on Inside Higher Education today. It is a truly important resource for us. A graduate of Princeton University, he has won 3 national awards for education reporting from Education Writers Association, including one in 2009 for a series of Inside Higher Education articles on college rankings. As a college president who relies on and appreciates the investigative reporting and community Inside Higher Education, Higher Ed provides, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Doug Lederman.
Good morning. It's great to be here. There's a group that I speak to every year, and the guy who introduces me does it every year as well, and he each year makes the joke that he wakes up each morning with me related. So I appreciate relating to reading our email, but and there's usually a couple of nervous chuckles, and people aren't quite sure what that all means. But so I appreciate the way Dr. Nieves stated that. He reads us every morning. Anyway, I want to thank, thanks to Governor Malloy, President Kennedy, Mr. Crawford, and the Presidents Gena, Glickman, and Dr. Nieves. I'm honored to be here today and to share the dais with all these dignitaries and Professor Rouse, who's going to speak after me. She's an expert on labor economics and probably has a lot more knowledge and insight into the community college's role in job creation and economic development than I do. So I thought I would focus my comments on the larger context in which community colleges fit in higher education these days, and some of the trends that I see coming at them at this time of great turbulence and transformation. As a journalist, I know a little bit about turbulence and transformation. Our industry has been transformed and really changed, and there's been a lot of pain for a lot of publications out there. But I think this is a time of real there's a time of risk and challenge for higher education and for community colleges, but also a time of opportunity. And I want to talk about that to this group of people who are, there's a lot of opportunity for the people who are running the institutions and for those of you in the audience, policymakers, business people, community leaders who have a stake in their success. I'm going to try and keep my formal comments short because I want to leave some time to turn this into a conversation. You have cards in your programs that I think they would like you to write questions on, and I hope you will, because I really want to answer your questions and talk to you about the things that are on your minds about this important topic we're here to talk about. So I think there'll probably be people in the staff who will collect them at a certain point. So community colleges have historically been treated as the poor stepchild of higher education. And that's because our country sort of has traditionally defined higher education in ways that elevate the bachelor's degree over other things, and something that I see starting to change a little bit, and I think is a good change. The institutions have had years of often second-class citizen status in state funding priorities, treatment in the mainstream news media, and in the hearts and minds of many would-be students, but at least traditional age ones, as many high school students have long viewed them as institutions of last resort. Rather than sulk, which some people might do if they were sort of not seen as if they were not seen as on the top of the ladder, the institutions have totally embraced their role, and I think that's why they deserve so much credit in our society. They have become the primary entry point to post-secondary education for many first-generation and or academically underprepared students. They have other missions as well. They've done the heavy lifting on other tasks that most higher education institutions aren't interested in, such as technical career training, remediation, English as a second language. But first and foremost, they have been access institutions and often widely underappreciated. In the last several years, I think we've really started to see a change there, and there are a bunch of reasons why. First is the increased recognition that other countries have surpassed us in college attainment, in the proportion of citizens who have certain levels of post-secondary education. And this is particularly true in credentials below the baccalaureate level, associate degrees, certificates, certifications. We're still doing very well in the country, particularly in the older generation, at the bachelor's degree level. But the further down you go in terms of the level of credential, we've been getting blown past by a bunch of other countries. What community colleges focus on is what the country needs most now. Second is the general consensus that the U.S. can reach its goals for college attainment and for the educated workforce, that the aggressive goals that President Obama and others have set, only if more adults continue or renew their post-high school educations, especially at a time when the traditional age population has entered a period of decline nationally. We are starting, I think it was as of 2 years ago, the proportion of the number of high school age, traditional age students has started declining nationally. So the only way we get to where we need to be in terms of college attainment is if we get more adults and people who've already who've either dropped out of college or never gone to college, coming back for more education. The third reason that community colleges are really having a day in the sun, as I like to call it, is the price pressures now have more and more students, traditional age and otherwise, looking for lower cost options for their first 2 years of college. And in almost every state, in almost every circumstance, the community college is the less expensive option for people looking for first 2 years of an post-secondary education. Perhaps the biggest change has been perceptual, though. Over the last decade, arguably beginning with President Clinton with his promise to make the, quote, 13th and 14th years of education as universal as the first 12, but peaking with this current administration, community colleges have gained a much more visible role in many federal and state higher ed policy discussions. Arguably never before in the country's history, or at least for 50 years, has there been a greater recognition of how essential higher education is to building successful lives for individuals and a thriving economic future for the country. And there's a recognition, too, that if higher education access is to expand, that's going to happen only by including those who've historically been excluded or at least underserved, first generation, low income, adult, certain minority groups. So as a result of this recognition, higher ed as a whole has been elevated in the sort of public policy discussion. And access institutions like these that are perceived to actually have the ability to serve the large numbers of adult and academically underprepared high school students who must be incorporated into post-secondary education if we're going to reach these goals are having a real renaissance and getting sort of a credit and a recognition that they haven't historically had, and it's about time. So this ought to be a good thing, an unequivocal good thing. It's always good when one's product is in demand, as those of you who have businesses know. The tricky part is that for higher education in general, and community colleges in particular, is what follows directly from that recognition. Because if you assert that this post-secondary education, is a benefit to which all Americans should have access, government, which does a lot of the funding of that through student aid and institutional support, has a meaningful role to play in ensuring equity of access, not just to an education, but to a quality education. And with that federal investment and state investment here comes intensified demands for proof that the education the government is helping to buy is meaningful and that the institutions providing it are using their federal monies not only legitimately, but increasingly wisely and efficiently. This scrutiny has been applied at the federal level, most recently to the for-profit colleges particularly, with which many community colleges compete on several fronts. But it's likely to be applied much more broadly and probably in slightly different ways to other institutions. There's a real sort of accountability movement that is taking hold in higher education at the federal level. It's certainly happening at the state level. We're seeing changes in financing formulas in some states to emphasize people completing degrees. This is particularly significant as reality sets in that this, as Governor Malloy said, this is not going to be a short-term economic contraction. We are in a situation, and it's true in most states, and it's true at the federal level, that there just are not going to be significant new dollars for governments to invest in students or in institutions. And with intensifying downward pressure on how much colleges can raise tuition to replace those lost funds, we're seeing real pressure on institutions to operate more efficiently. That economic reality has also begun to force colleges and universities of all kinds, and for public institutions, the government bodies that oversee them, to ask ever more rigorous questions about the institution's missions. Many colleges in all sectors, I suspect, will be forced to decide whether they can continue to offer the full range of programs and services that they do now, or whether, with funds from taxpayers or endowments for private institutions or student tuition, all limited, they need to be choosier about what they do and what they leave to others. Nowhere is that choice likely to be more difficult than for community colleges, given the multiplicity of missions that I talked about before. Already, we see community colleges in Nevada and California deciding not to serve those remedial students who are least likely to advance to credit-bearing courses. They're literally saying, these open access institutions are saying, no, we can't afford to sort of use our limited slots on people who we just don't think are going to get to where they need to get to. We've seen others cut back on non-credit continuing education offerings that a lot of community colleges offer in their communities to serve the surrounding people. And I suspect we may reach a point, if we're not already there, where the economic difficulties exacerbate the tension that has long existed between most two-year institutions' primary missions, one of sort of economic development and workforce development and job training, and the other of general education and transfer. Those are really the sort of, among all the other missions that community colleges have, those tend to be the two foremost. Most community colleges continue to do both, and probably will continue to. President Glickman wrote an essay for Inside Higher Ed a few weeks ago that bemoaned what she called a besmirching of short-term credit hour certificates or courses that meet local or regional needs in certain ways of gauging community colleges' productivity. That's a real concern, and she was right to identify it. But as accountability pressures to get students to complete credentials grows, I have an additional concern, I'd say, especially as the reward system increasingly favors those institutions that give workers skills to enter the workforce faster. Again, I have sort of a competing worry, and that's that the emphasis on credential completion and the difficulties some community colleges have getting credit for the general education credits that they've delivered to the students who transfer on to four-year institutions will prompt some community colleges to emphasize short-term and vocationally oriented programs over the sorts of general education courses and disciplines that prepare students not only for continuing their college educations, but also to be critical thinkers and to communicate well in their careers. Mr. Crawford talked about learning how the bank likes to hire people who have learned how to learn. And that's a set of skills that people, you can learn those in specifically skill-related courses, but that's really what the sort of underlying general education that community colleges offer really is about providing. At a time where community colleges and other public institutions particularly are finding themselves with fewer resources, I'm worried that we're going to see choices that are narrowing, and I think it's almost inevitable. There's a real disconnect at times between what many business leaders say they want in employees, workers who can write well, work collaboratively with others, solve problems, and think creatively, and what their HR departments seem to emphasize when they hire. And I think that there's that sort of communication problem may contribute to this uncertainty about which direction institutions should go in. If the economic realities force colleges of all types to narrow their mission and choose some priorities over others, as I believe may be inevitable in the economic climate that we have and are likely to see over the next 5 to 7 years, something important may be lost. I would urge community college leaders and those responsible for supporting them and helping them set their agendas to define economic development in the broadest possible way. It doesn't mean they should not focus or ignore training workers with a set of skills for a specific job or career. But I really think it's crucial that we not lose this idea of the community college as the primary access point to post-secondary education for a large group of people whom the country needs to be prepared at the broadest possible level to contribute to the economy and to society. That's a mission that community colleges have served for 50 years, and one that the country will be in trouble if they are forced to walk away from because of a lack of resources or a lack of strategic direction. With that, I'd like to take your questions. I really want to hear what you have to say and respond to your questions. Are there people here who want to collect cards from anybody who's got them? Do people have cards? Do people want to just, if they haven't turned them in, do you just want to ask questions? I'm happy to just have you raise your hand and take a question. Come on, don't be shy. Sure, here. The question was how Connecticut is faring with regard to the rest of the country. Are you talking about in general in higher education, or specifically related to? Well, I mean, listen, I think we, like lots of people, are watching very closely at, I think some of the trends I've seen recently, I mean, the decision to restructure the higher education system is one there's a lot of discussion nationally about the best way to structure higher education. I tend to believe that structure matters. It's not structure matters, but what really matters is leadership, and good leadership is going to sort of trump structure. I mean, I think you can have good centralized structures. I think you can have good decentralized structures. I think what I'm seeing that I understand, and the reason we're seeing lots of places look for ways to coordinate what they're doing, and I think part of the broader that mission differentiation, the more broadly that mission differentiation happens, the better. If every institution is left to make its own sets of decisions about what it offers and what it doesn't, if they all make the same decision about, we can end up with lots of things not being done by anybody. And that's where I think good coordination makes sense, because if the goal, I do think that places are going to have to be choosier. And if that happens at a statewide level rather than at a local or regional level, you've got a better chance of having thoughtful decisions made and having places emphasize their strengths and have others pick up and maybe do less on the areas that they're weaker in. The danger, again, is that if everybody's left to make their own decisions, higher education is kind of it's not exactly a market because there's so much public money subsidizing it, but to the extent that higher education does operate like a market, you're going to see lots of institutions choose to do the things that have the best return. And that makes sense, but that's why we see schools dropping language programs and dropping other humanities programs. We had the governor of Florida suggest that maybe Florida had a few too many anthropologists, and I think we're going to see. So I think there is a logic to having coordination happen that protects, that makes sure that the whole enterprise continues to do important things. I guess I can. I don't know if you want me to go any further on Connecticut, but why don't we turn to some other questions, and I'll. Sure, out there.
Good morning. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. I just wanted to ask, have you thought about the value for the community college system in incorporating, I'm going to say, kind of a range of ideas involved in sustainability, health prevention, and green chemistry into community college curriculums?
Well, listen, those are all smart. I mean, those are. I mean, every community college system in the country is looking for to connect, and there was the governor talked about disconnect between where the colleges or what the colleges are turning out and what the businesses need. If those are growth areas and growth, and they're likely to be in lots of places. Those are hot topics: sustainability, green sustainability, all those things. Those are going to be areas where there are jobs and where the jobs of the future are. And so there's a total logic in having those programs developed. And so I think we've seen huge growth. We run a list almost every week of new programs that are created, and healthcare, sustainability, environmental, other environmental issues are always on that list. Those are that's where the focus is, and that's certainly where the Obama administration has put some of its dollars in terms of economic development, and so it is hugely important. And I want to make clear that it's hugely important to me that community colleges serve the jobs needs of their area. That is if not the primary function. All I'm urging is that they make sure that wherever possible, the underlying general education doesn't get lost in the shuffle. That's my main concern.
So
other questions? Sure, over here.
Yes, I'll make this very brief. I'm just concerned what I'm hearing on the news with what's going on with the Republican candidates in debate about one potentially abolishing the Department of Education or calling it inefficient bureaucracy. But I know community colleges, and I started here many years ago and went on to UConn. How can we better serve non-traditional students, military vets, special needs, ESL, and part-time and first-generation students much better? I mean, you're right about the cost, and it's a way to start if you want to transfer. But everything's changing now, and I'm glad that I started here, and it's not seen as a second-rate college if you don't go on to Yale, because not everyone's going to go on to Ivy League college. Right. And last, even the non-traditional workers that are good with their hands, mechanics that can come back and learn technology too. So I guess in that way, how can we enhance the word in a positive way that colleges are here to stay, and government does serve a role, and it's not anti-business, but we can work together from both the public and private sector and watch out for the code words, because I work for the U.S. Postal Service and proud of it. And government workers pay our taxes too, just like private citizens. So.
Right. Well, listen, I think Republican candidates have been talking about killing the Department of Education pretty much since the day it was created, and I think there have been a couple of Republican presidents who haven't, I think they even campaigned on the promise to do so. So I actually don't think. I mean, there is a worrisome anti-intellectual and sort of anti-education trend that sort of emerges around this time every election cycle. I think the case for the important connection between education and business and education and economic vitality has been made too strongly for anybody for that really to be risked. I think the biggest challenge we have is that, there are very worrisome statistics in our country about the different levels of economic advancement based on socioeconomic status. You are much more likely to go and to finish college as a dumb rich kid than you are as a poor smart kid. About 5 times likelier. And that's something that we as a country ought to be ashamed of. And I think it's institutions like the ones hosting this event that have kept those statistics even as close as they are. And I think the sort of the idea that higher education isn't hugely important, even for purely economic reasons that's not going to be challenged. So I really don't think that's the worry. I think the question is really going to be about money and how we find enough money to have the institutions operate, do all the things that we're expecting them to do. And I think, frankly, there's going to be more pressure on them to make the case that they're doing it effectively. That's probably going to be the biggest challenge for these and other institutions over the next few years is proving that they are providing value. And I think that case can be made, and I think when they do, the money will follow. We're going to wrap it up. Okay, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and happy to answer questions.
Professor of Economics and Public Affairs at Princeton University. Her primary research and teaching interests are in labor economics with a focus on the economics of education. She has studied and researched topics such as the economic benefits of community college attendance, the use of computers in schools, the effects of education, inputs on student achievement, and the significance of financial aid on college matriculation and student occupational selection. Currently, Dr. Rouse is researching the effect of performance-based scholarships on post-secondary student time use. Her PhD is from Harvard, and she has served the White House at the National Economic Council as a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Dr. Rouse was an editor of the Journal of the Labor Economics and is currently a senior editor of The Future of Children, a Princeton Brookings publication. In an opinion piece she wrote last August for the New York Times, Dr. Rouse said, "All signs suggest that the need for a strong education system will continue to grow as employers increasingly demand workers with strong analytical, interpersonal, and communication skills. In these trying economic times, we should be looking for ways to effectively increase our investments in education, not cut them." It is my honor to introduce you to Dr. Cecilia Elena Rouse.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and actually thank you for that introduction, because maybe I'm a broken record, I've got one idea, but I wanted to talk to you today actually about the importance of education for our economic growth going forward. I want to take on the issue about whether we've been putting on too many investments in post-secondary education, with a little bit of a focus on community colleges, and then I wanted to end with some discussion of the recent federal investments in community colleges, which I interpret as a way actually to get more value out of our investments and to reduce the risks a bit for students. So I know I don't have enough time, and I have a lot of slides. This is a class. This is an institution of higher education. I'm a faculty member, so let's look at the data. So I wanted to start as a... Okay, this is not moving. No. This is a good start. Oh, there we go. So I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I think, education is something that almost everybody always agrees is a good investment, but I think even more so today. So this is just a reminder of where we've come over the last couple of years. We started a recession in December of 2007. If you look at this, it shows you GDP growth by quarter. What you see immediately is we just fell into a gigantic trough. This was a very deep recession. We could have a longer discussion about this. My own personal belief is that the efforts of the federal government through the Recovery Act made a difference for turning that around. But really what I wanted to remind us all in this chart was just how deep this recession was, and that now we see that the bars are above zero, so that we see some recovery, but it's not strong enough. And because this recession began in the financial sector, we're projecting it's going to take some time for full recovery. Now, what do I need to do to make this happen each time? Maybe I should, let me try this. Okay, here we go. This is where slideshows should live. Which one? Yeah, I'm going to use the arrows and not the mouse. Yeah, okay. So along with that, the decrease in GDP and the fact that we went into this trough, what came along with that is the fact that when you don't have aggregate demand, then you don't have demand for workers as well. And so not surprisingly, it's very hard to see, but the little gray bars are recession shading. So you can see during times of recession, unemployment increases. And if you look at this, I normally move around. At a rate we hadn't seen since the early 80s. But in the early 80s, we knew what caused that recession. It was monetary policy. The Fed said, oops, we made a mistake, and so they changed their monetary policy. Unemployment fell very quickly. As I mentioned before, this recession started in the financial sector. We lost when the president came into office, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. We have had very high rates of unemployment for a rather long time. That bar is also rather thick. Fortunately, the unemployment rate has been decreasing in recent months. But if you look underneath the data a little bit more, you'll see that part of that is because workers are just withdrawing from the labor force, not because they're getting jobs. So I think we still want to characterize this as being a recovery, but not a recovery that's near strong enough. And if you look at the toll on workers, as a consequence of having so many workers lose their jobs so quickly and having the recession last for so long, what we have now is historically high levels of the proportion of the unemployed who've been unemployed for 6 months or longer. We actually call those the long-term unemployed because normally unemployment insurance lasts for 6 months when it's under the state system. What has happened since this recession started, and what happens in every single recession, is the federal government then funds extensions in that unemployment insurance. And so that's why we think of people who've been unemployed for longer than 27 weeks as being long-term unemployed. We've got almost half of those who are unemployed have been unemployed for more than 6 months. This is why we've got a problem on our hands going forward, is because unemployment is a first-in, last-out kind of process. Those who are laid off first are going to be the last who are rehired. And in a recession that lasts, our recession technically ended a year or two ago, but in a downturn that lasts as long as we've had, where we still have over 4 job seekers for every job opening, what you have is those people who are unemployed at the beginning of this recession are going to have been out of work on average for years before they're actually rehired. This is going to contribute, and this is part of the reason why, if we look at forecasts for where our GDP growth is going forward, this is a compilation of forecasts by the MSR is the federal government's mid-session review, so it's the official forecast by the federal government. The CBO is the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. And then we have the blue chip average, which is an average of forecasters of private companies. What you can see is there's near universal consensus that going forward, if you look in the out years, there's the short-term growth. I think also this was all done before some of our more recent economic news. So in the short term, I think people probably they're raising their forecast a bit for 2012, and you can see that there's some optimism through 2015. But when you look going forward, we're looking at rather anemic growth. It's positive, but it's rather anemic. Not enough to really bring back the kind of prosperity that I think this country is used to having. So the question becomes, how can we beat these projections, and how can we get all of those workers who've been out of work for 6 months or more back into the labor force, and furthermore making room for all of the students that you're educating and all the young folks who are coming out today, so that they can also be ensured that they can have full and healthy economic lives. So if we look so we're an academic institution, so we say to ourselves, okay, we need economic growth. Well, what are the foundations of economic growth? Well, economists think that there are 3 fundamental legs to that stool. First of all, you need physical inputs. So you need to have machines, tools, infrastructure, because those are on the physical side, the things that you're going to put in order to make your product. You need technology. I'm going to skip to the third. The technology is the way that you transform those inputs to outputs, and you need innovations in terms of technology so that we can do that better and faster, more efficiently. But third, you need workers, and you need skilled labor. And that is a critical part of our foundations of growth. It's part of the reason why economists universally, we could spend the rest of my time doing economics jokes about how you're 3 economists, 10 opinions. But one of the things that economists will agree on is that it's very important that we have skilled labor and that education is a big part of that. You can see that in the data. This is one of the facts that economists will get behind. This is a plot of annual earnings by the number of years of schooling that have been completed by individuals. This is data from the Current Population Survey, which is a nationwide survey of workers in the U.S., using the most recent data that allows you to do it this way, which is March of 2011. You can see that for years 0 to 10, 11, so high school dropouts, it's fairly flat. In the U.S., most people get at least through 8th grade, if not 9th grade. We don't really have dropouts kicking in until high school, so there's not a lot of data down that anyway. You can see that there's not a big relationship. But importantly, especially when you get past 11th grade, 12th grade into the post-secondary sector, you see that there's a strong relationship between years of schooling completed and years and annual earnings. As an economist, we believe that workers are paid for their marginal productivity, meaning that there's this relationship holds because employers value that schooling. They believe that they get value from the skills and the knowledge that workers learn while they're in school. Now, some argue that this relationship is not causal, that what we haven't uncovered in this graph is that the schools are providing additional skills for workers, but that rather what we've uncovered is that, well, the really bright, energetic, productive kids are the ones that go to school. Those same kids would have gotten a higher wage had they gone into the labor force directly. This was a long debate in economics. About 10, 15 years ago, there was a very large literature where people were trying to estimate the causal impact of schooling on earnings. And surprisingly, from using a variety of techniques, looking at a variety of circumstances, almost all the papers come out suggesting that while some of it may not be causal, there's a huge causal component. This is really important because if we don't think that schooling causes higher productivity, then we shouldn't be making public investments there. Individuals may choose to go to school, but we shouldn't be putting our public dollars there. But economists, even the very conservative economist, Jim Heckman, who's at the University of Chicago, a Nobel laureate, would even agree now that, yes, the evidence suggests that additional funding in schooling, he's a big believer in preschool, but nonetheless, he would even agree that a large component of this relationship is due to the skills and knowledge that workers get while they're in school. So this is the fact that employers believe that their workers are more skilled is part of why it's a foundation of growth. But then the question is, well, can we get a better understanding for what are the skills that they think that they're gaining while they're in school? So these are data from the 1990s. This kind of analysis has been redone, and actually it still holds over the last decade. And what this was is saying, well, if we look at occupations that are growing and those that are not growing, and we look at the kinds of skills that they use, can we see a relationship there? And two, is there a relationship between those skills and education? And so this is work that was done by David Otter and Dick Murnane and Frank Levy, who are up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And what they did is they looked at 5 different skills. They looked at non-routine analytic skills. That means skills where you have to think on your feet. Somebody was saying that in one of the earlier sessions, an employer was saying, I like students who can learn to learn, and who basically you can think on your feet. You don't just going to, sort of, okay, I'm going to do steps 1, 2, and 3, but you can think in creative ways, you can problem solve. They look at non-routine interactive skills. That's where you have to have good communication skills. So you need to interact with other workers, you need to interact with customers, but you have to interact with another being, and you need to do so in a way that's not routine. Then they looked at routine cognitive. I think many doctors would agree that while their jobs have obviously there's a big cognitive component, but a lot of it is actually routine. And so they're asking the same questions almost every day of every patient. Not entirely, but a lot of it is fairly routine. Then there are jobs which are manual, but they're nonetheless they're non-routine, meaning they're not always doing the same thing every day. They've got to, again, be able to troubleshoot, and then routine manual. The thing about routine jobs, whether they're cognitive or manual, is that they can be replaced by computer code, or they can be replaced by a robot, because you can get somebody to just follow those steps. The non-routine kinds of skills are those where we humans, at least for the time being, have an advantage, that's what our brains can do. We can take things out of the ordinary, see connections that, at the moment, technology can't necessarily do. And so not surprisingly, what they found is that occupations that were growing are those that required non-routine skills, whether it be analytic, interactive, or cognitive, and those that were declining were manual. If you then look at the current population survey and look at the educational content of occupations categorized by these skill levels, what you will see is that the jobs that have these non-routine skills also have higher proportions of workers that have post-secondary educations. That's not a causal argument, but it is a very strong association. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, every couple of years they venture in a place where many of us should not dare to go, but they do dare to go, and we should be thankful for it, which is that they try to forecast which occupations will be growing and which will not. Forecasting is a tricky business, and you're really using data from the past to say something about the future. It's tricky, it's not perfect. But nonetheless, it's what we've got, and they spend a lot of time and effort doing it. And what they show is that if it looked between 2008 and 2018, so for that decade, that the jobs that are going to be growing the fastest require some level of post-secondary schooling. And if you see that actually those jobs that require an associate's degree or a post-secondary vocational award actually edge out those that require a bachelor's degree or more. So again, we have many places where we see evidence that schooling is important for economic growth, employers value schooling, and it's going to become increasingly important as we go forward. Okay. As a result, we see that workers are getting more schooling. This is a graph that shows the change in educational attainment as a proportion of the population by the level of schooling. The top line shows the change in the proportion of the population that has an associate's degree. That's the top line. You can see that over the past 20 years, that's where we've had the fastest growth in terms of the educational composition of our population. The next two lines show, again, these are post-secondary levels, whether it's just a bachelor's degree and no more, or those who have gotten more than a bachelor, something higher than an advanced degree. And those who have some college. So the some college means that they went and started school, but they didn't necessarily get a degree. They may have started at a 4-year institution or a 2-year institution, but they didn't get a degree. That has been increasing because it's above 100, but you can see that individuals who are choosing or going to school are actually staying and getting a degree of some kind. And then where you see the decreases because of these are proportions, so they have to add to 100. So what we've got is decreases in those who get only a high school degree or who drop out. So we see that there have been responses. We all understand we need to be getting more schooling. And yet, the rate at which we're doing so has been slowing down. So this is a graph that was done by Claudia Golden and Larry Katz. This was through 2007. I've actually updated it, and it looks pretty similar. And so I'm, in a nod to my thesis advisors, I'm using their data. So the top two lines look at the proportion of the population that has a high school degree. The dashed line is the younger folks, so those are the individuals aged 25 to 29. The lower line are those who are 25 and older. Same for bachelor's degree in the lower line. So and if you look at the early years, 1971 through, the early 80s, the fact that the dashed line is above the solid line means that the younger generation was attaining more schooling than their parents. And what you can see is that those lines are converging, both in terms of the proportion with a high school degree and those who get a bachelor's degree or more. And this slowdown, this convergence, has meant that we are slipping behind in terms of our international colleagues, in terms of other countries. So the U.S. is kind of towards the bottom third of the chart. I put them in slightly darker bars. The gray bars show you the proportion of 25 to 34-year-olds with a post-secondary degree. The lighter blue bars are the blue bars are the 55 to 64-year-olds. And what you can see is if you look at the proportion of 55 to 64-year-olds with a college degree, we're number one. If you look at the proportion of young folks with a degree, these are data from a report that the OECD put out in 2010. We're number 10. They put out a new report this past fall where we have slipped, and I just can't bear to put that up, so I didn't put it up. But, so we are slipping behind. And because the fact that we're slipping behind our international, I don't want to say competitors, but our international partners, it's what led President Obama to set as a goal that by 2020 the U.S. will once again have the highest proportion of college graduates in the world. We set a secondary goal to this primary goal, which is that we will also have 5 million additional community college graduates by that time as well. It goes along with what we call the 2020 goal. And the president also asked every American to commit to trying some kind of post-secondary schooling or career training. It doesn't have to be a four-year college. It doesn't have to be, that you're going to get your bachelor's degree or an advanced degree, but to try to do something post-high school. So he set those goals, and, the administration, along with Congress, therefore made new investments in education. Everyone's compelled. We're in a recession. We know that we've seen this can slow down in our competitiveness in terms of educational attainment. We need to be making additional investments in education. So through the Recovery Act, we had investments at all levels. We had, a historic investments in preschool. We had the somewhat controversial but infamous Race to the Top Fund, which was an effort to spark innovation in the K-12 sector. We had increases in Pell Grants. We created the American Opportunity Tax Credit for 4 years of college tuition. So we had these big investments in education all the way through, pre-K through college. And then through the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act, so the Affordable Care Act was one part of that, but the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act was the second half of that. This is the act where we moved from replacing guaranteed student loans with direct lending. And this is like good government 101. So we, take out the middleman, and with the savings, we use the savings and put it back into what we believe would be higher return investments in higher education. So that included shoring up Pell Grants, creating a new community college and career training grant program, which I'll talk about towards the end, expanding income-based repayment options for students, which really helps to take out some of the risk of taking out student loans by saying that if in the end you take out these student loans and your income isn't high enough, we're going to be able to cap how much you actually have to pay back based on your income, and increasing support for some of our more disadvantaged institutions. So we had these new exciting investments in education. I should just say that we got $2 billion over 4 years for the community college and career training grants. We were looking for much more from the administration side. But, you have to work with Congress when putting together legislation. But this did include, new focus and renewed energy in terms of community colleges. But no good deed goes unpunished, and as a result, with these new investments, which were really historic levels, everything was historic when you're in the greatest recession since the Great Depression, but many people then started to say, wait a minute, we're spending too much money in schooling. We're over-investing. It's not good money. And the discussion was really about post-secondary schooling. It is truthful that probably this was a bit more about the four-year sector, but it was really an argument about post-secondary schooling in general. Common arguments were the return to schooling isn't causal, meaning that the relationship I showed you early wasn't causal, that those students would do well anyway. Again, I think the evidence suggests that's not true, so I personally don't think that's true. Another argument was the return is just too risky to justify the costs. Tuition has been skyrocketing. The students just aren't getting the value out. And then schools are just inefficient. Well, I'm probably running out of time, so I'm not going to talk certainly not about the inefficiency, but I want to just run through a few numbers to show you that I personally believe that certainly for the vast majority of students, getting a post-secondary education is worth it. Is it risky? Absolutely. Every investment is, but I think it's one of the safer investments we've got. So oh gosh, okay, so first of all, I'm just going to start running through these. I get up here and I'm happy to be here, so I could stay forever. So just, quickly, has tuition been increasing? It has been, but it's important to separate out the sticker price. So you guys know this. It's important to separate out what is advertised and what's the full tuition versus what students are actually paying. The red bars represent the full tuition, the blue bars net tuition once you take out grants. And what you can see is while there have been large increases in terms of full tuition, net tuition has grown much more slowly. Importantly, you see here, when you look at public two-year colleges, they're a really good deal compared to public four-year institutions. And they're a good deal compared to private, not-for-profit four-year institutions and compared to private for-profit institutions. But in every sector, the net tuition is much lower and has grown more slowly than the full tuition. If we look at student borrowing, that said, tuition has been increasing. We know that middle-class incomes have been more stagnant, and so more students are borrowing. In terms of borrowing for public two-year institutions, this is looking at students 6 years after they started, what fraction borrowed for their education. You can see that about 40%, 41% of two-year college students have borrowed. That's much lower because tuitions are lower than in any of the other sectors. For the private not-for-profits, they're up now up to almost 90% of students borrow, but that's another conversation as well. So students are borrowing. On their cumulative debt, among those who have borrowed, most students, as you know, would have zeros here, and so these numbers would be much smaller if we look at how much do students actually owe. I think the median two-year college student owes exactly zero after 6 years, but among those who did borrow, after 6 years in 2009, on average, those students owe about $14,000. The reason it's so much higher than what we were looking at before is because a number of them transferred to four-year institutions along the way, and so they're paying the higher tuition. Okay, so the question is, was this worth it? So first of all, let's look at the benefits of higher education. I talked about earnings. One of the things that underlies those earnings is that if you go to an institution of higher education, you're just more likely to get a job. This is unemployment rates in December of 2007, and then the most recent numbers from December of 2011. And you can see that the more schooling a student has, or a worker has, the less likely that worker is to be unemployed. In this recession, everybody was hurt, and I think part of the backlash against post-secondary institutions and saying that it's just too risky is that unemployment rates doubled for those who have a post-secondary education, and I think many people said, wait a minute, we used to be that the unemployment rate was about 2%, now it's 4%, so there are more of us that are unemployed. That is true. This was a recession. It was a broad-based recession that affected everybody, but it's still much lower than your likelihood of being unemployed had you not gotten that bachelor's degree. And same in terms of looking at those with some college or have an associate's degree, or who have, the more schooling you have, the less likely you are to be unemployed. We've already talked about the fact that there's an earnings advantage for getting more schooling. Okay, so but if we put it all together, so I talked somewhat about the direct cost of going, and I sort of characterized that through the borrowing the students might have to do to pay for their schooling. The bigger cost of going to college is that you're not working. Now, a lot of two-year college students work while they're in school. Four-year college students do as well. But I would argue that even if you're working while you're in school, you're not taking the kind of job you could take if you were not going to school. You may be working part-time. You may be working in a less intensive job. So I still think it's fair to say, well, I'm going to look at the earnings that you would have had if you'd stopped when you got to high school compared to what you would have you got for having gotten your higher level of schooling. So these bars show you the gap in earnings between high school graduates and the different levels of schooling. So you can see that the blue bar at the very bottom are high school dropouts, so they're in the negative zone, so they're earning less than high school graduates. Everybody else is above it. Those who have an associate degree is the sort of greenish, the lime green bar. You can see that this is in each year. This is the annual earnings gap. They're earning about $8,000 more than a high school graduate per year. You can see that the more schooling you get, the more you earn than a high school graduate per year. And over a lifetime, that adds up. So if we look in terms of the costs and benefits of having gone to school, you can see the present discounted value of the earnings advantage. By getting an associate's degree, those workers are earning over $100,000 over their lifetimes more than they would have earned had they stopped at a high school degree. And you can see that compares very favorably to the $13,000, $14,000 that they might have taken out in debt. And that holds even for, that's going to hold even for those who get a bachelor's degree and have more higher levels of debt or who get more than a BA. Now, I can hear you cry, but not everybody earns the average. There are those who go to their schooling and they're not doing as well. So we did the same kind of exercise, but looked at those who are at the 25th percentile. This is the reason why this isn't years. This is looking more over the lifetime, so at every age. And if we add that up, we can still see that those at the 25th percentile are going to earn about if they get an associate's degree, are going to earn about $65,000 more over their lifetime. This is in present discounted value, so it means that I'm looking at the future. I'm discounting. The future is weighed much less heavily than the today is. They're still getting a huge advantage over what they might have taken out in loans, and this also is incorporating the fact that they did not work while they were in school. So I personally think that the evidence suggests that for the vast majority of students, it makes sense to go to college and pursue a degree. That said, there are risks, and we can do better. So in the Obama administration, and I would argue the federal government more generally, Congress, because they've passed these these laws. A lot of the emphasis for trying to make things work better at the community college level has been trying to do even better at linking the community college curriculum with what the needs of the local employers are and of industry. Now, you and I know that community colleges historically have worked hard to develop relationships with employers and have always attempted to be responsive. But nonetheless, we all know we could also do better. So the Trade Adjustment Assistance Community College and Career Training Grant Program, there's a history behind that title and the focus on trade adjustment assistance. We don't have time for that. But what it does is it provides $2 billion in competitive grants over the next 4 years. The grants are meant to emphasize programs at community colleges or consortia of community colleges that have at least one employer as an active sponsor. So it's meant to really be emphasizing those kinds of partnerships. And it's meant to be, expanding programs that will have and be beneficial to workers, especially those who've been displaced during this downturn. The first set of competitions was last year. They awarded the finalists, or the awardees were announced in September. Every one of these partnerships had a very strong employer partnership, and they were funding programs such as those that were designed with industry, so they were specifically, the curriculum was specifically designed with industry in mind, with a specific industry. There were some in aerospace, and I actually read through all the grants, and I can't remember some of the others. They had technology-enabled learning. There was contextualized curriculum for all kinds, but especially for developmental workers, to help them get through those developmental courses more quickly and to make it that there's more relevant, more interesting, more beneficial. Strategy to reduce time to degree, because we know, especially for older workers that are juggling so many things in their lives, to make programs more effective, more efficient, and to make it that they don't have to spend 2-4 years in a program, but can get that degree more quickly. That can be beneficial to them. And as I mentioned, the linkages with local employers included internships, mock interviews, on-the-job training, where they were actually committing to doing that. The grants range from about $2.5 million to $25 million. Another thing that the administration, that was born from the administration, was Skills for America's Future, which is housed at the Aspen Institute. Penny Pritzker, who's the CEO and chairperson of the Pritzker Foundation Realty Group, was the force behind this. She brought together focus groups with employers and community college leaders and talked about, well, what can we do to make things better? And the Skills for America's Future was born of this effort. It's a nationwide network. I think it's something to be looking into and being a part of if you're interested in ways to be part of an organization and an effort to really bring these partnerships together. They're trying to make it the Skills for America's Futures partnerships can get some extra points in the competitions for the grant programs that I just mentioned through the Department of Labor. So it's an effort to generate at least one really strong partnership in every state, and to generate the kind of partnerships where the students are not just sort of, talking to employers, but that there's a greater link to a potential job at the end. And then the last thing that I'll mention that also kind of came out of the administration and also through the Aspen Institute was the Aspen Institute Prize for Community College Excellence. I actually had the honor of being on the second round selection committee for this, which is part of the reason I thought I should just talk about it. And Manchester Community College next year might want to participate. So this is an award to an excellent community college where excellence is meant to be looking at graduating students or getting them to transfer, and also looking beyond and looking at how well they do in terms of the workforce. There's a lot of emphasis on data collection and efforts to improve by just having the data to know what is actually going on. So Valencia College in Florida was named the first winner. Valencia College got $600,000 as their award. And then these are the finalists, and they split $400,000 among them. It's an effort to bring recognition to the community college sector, which we know is just so important in higher education. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up by really just saying that a highly educated workforce really is a key component to economic growth. We're in an era where revenue is scarce. We have to be very smart and strategic in how we invest our public dollars. But education is one area where it is a smart place to be putting our public money. And that said, I think we all have to recognize that it's not like if you put $1 on a student or put an investment in a program, that's going to have a guaranteed payoff. There are risks on both sides. But if you look at, any investment has risks, but that the return in terms of education, I think, is got lower risks and a higher payoff. That said, there's always room for improvement, and I think looking for ways for improving the relationship between the local economy and industry and community college is one of those places where we can always do better. So thank you. I hope I have a couple minutes for questions, but maybe not. Okay. Thank you.
While we are running behind, we'll allow for 2 questions, okay? Please be fast.
Sorry.
No.
I'll talk quickly, too.
I have a question concerning the cost of college. In the countries that have higher percentages of young people completing college degrees, my sense is that the tuition costs in those countries are much lower than they are in the United States. So I wonder whether or not, when you look at the data, American college students or American young people are making a rational choice. Going to college is a risky investment. It's a significant investment. So a lot of them are saying, well, why bother? I work with students every day, and students tell me that, there's a person at Starbucks with a 4-year degree, with a bachelor's degree, who wasn't able to get a better job. I think the problem is that as the cost of college increases in the United States, the potential return declines. And the returns are risky, especially now since most American workers are basically in a global market. And in a global market, competing with Chinese workers who are able to work at much lower wage rates. So the problem I see is that, to some extent, yeah, we have fewer students going to college, fewer students completing bachelor's degrees, but that may be a rational choice on their part, given the risky situation that they face.
So, I'm sort of short on time, and I very much appreciate that. That's what I tried to show you, actually, was that I think I appreciate that the students are saying that if I get my 4-year degree, I'm going to work at Starbucks, and what I would argue that at least they have a job at Starbucks. And I know that's not the most glamorous response at the moment. I think we're in a downturn. I think we will recover, and I think that the students are actually earning skills that will benefit them even more in another few years. But that's what I was trying to show, that you have to look at the opportunity cost of not having gone at all. And that's what I think a lot of people are missing. The unemployment rates for those who only have a high school diploma are 14%. And so while I get what they're saying, and I really do appreciate that, they have to look at, Derek Bach said, if you think education expensive, try the alternative. And that, I think we really have to keep that in mind. But I also am somebody who's very hopeful. I really do believe we're coming out of this recession. They will see better opportunities going forward. In terms of the international comparisons, yes, the differences in costs, I think, are part of the explanation. But I think more importantly, I think it's our K-12 system. I think we're not serving our students well so that they're not coming to college prepared, and therefore they're struggling through their 4-year degree. Some of them are not even getting through their 4-year degree. They're stuck in developmental courses. And I think in other countries, if you look at the countries where they're doing well, they're doing much better on the international comparisons in terms of the test scores as well. So I personally think that that's a bigger component to why we're slipping behind, because I think the biggest component of non-completion is not tuition, and we could talk about that, about the impact of tuition on completion. But a much bigger factor is the skills that students come to college compared with.
One last question. Let's thank Dr. Rouse for her presentation. Thank you so much.
For those people that were interested and that could stay, that we would summarize what happened in the session sort of briefly before we closed. And so for those of you that are here, I want to thank you for staying and coming to hear what the summaries from the 3 sessions that we had are, and that I hope that over the course of the year that we will see your engagement in some of the ongoing activities that will come out of this. I'm going to ask Janet Lampe, who happens to be our Director of Business and Industry, was the note taker in manufacturing. And since I have a summary that is 1 page each for the other 2 sessions, and she has a summary that's 8 pages, I asked her if she would please just briefly give you the highlights of the session on manufacturing for those of you that weren't in that session.
We had a really good session. That's why we have 8 pages. I'm sure the others were too, but I tried to be as complete as possible. I will just synthesize it by saying that the common denominator in the discussion was that we are in a time of growth in manufacturing where the opportunities are many and the qualified are few. And so the overall discussion with Elliot Ginsberg from CCAT, Frank Gallooni from Asnuntuck, Senator Gary LeBeau, Tom Phillips from Capital Workforce Partners, and Michael Polo, who is a manufacturer at AdChem, and Catherine Sievers, who's faculty here. There were many perspectives that came to light, but there was a central theme, and that was that we are at a turning point when it comes to manufacturing, that with the opportunities for projects such as the 2 submarines being built by Electric Boat and the Dreamliner being built by Pratt & Whitney, that this is really the time for manufacturing, and that the emphasis needs to be not only in preparing those who are not yet in manufacturing, but those who are already there and need to tweak their skills. And the other message was that we also need to reach out to younger and younger students, even to middle school students, to portray manufacturing as it really is and not as the presumption is regarding manufacturing. Since it is such a high-tech field now, it is something that ought to be considered even by young people who are so attracted to technology in other fields. That was the basic message. Thank you.
Is anybody in here who was in the healthcare session? Okay. Okay. Well, you can fill in the gaps for me, unless you'd like to come up. The healthcare scribe gave a summary, three basic points that came up, and that was to talk about health reform and changes in the population that require changes to be made to economic drivers, accountability, transparency, quality of care, and cost containment to create a patient-centered model. Secondly, the need to identify core competencies required by employers for present and for future workers, some new and some enhanced for people who are moving in their careers. Talking about careers in health information technology, various care characteristics, medical coding and billing, consumer education, and accelerated program from the associate degree nurse to the baccalaureate degree nurse. And third, that patients need to feel like they're being counseled by Dr. Oz. So I think I think there was, at least in my generation, certainly you didn't question the authority of your physician, and I think I think part of that is to talk about what is that physician that's looking at you holistically and willing to have conversations and take questions and that kind of comfort level and trying to build that kind of culture. The third panel, there were 2 key points from the business and creation panel, so they say, but there are 3 listed. And that is the need to focus on training for a new and aging workforce, to repair communication channels between the business environment and the colleges. There is some discussion, and I think you heard it from Cece Rouse, and I've heard it from other speakers, about whether or not there really is a disjoint between what businesses need and what colleges provide, or whether that's an intermittent kind of a question, or we're just not keeping up fast enough. But that's certainly something that Governor Malloy mentioned and obviously was discussed here. Connecticut, this is the second, Connecticut needs to become business-friendly, which means we need to review purposes of regulations and process for businesses large and small in regards to licensing regulations, kind of the need to break the mold that we've been following and build a real infrastructure change. And then finally, the need to look at growth and I don't get. Need to look at growth and recreation of jobs. I'm not sure what that meant. Recreation. Recreation. That would be the right word. And to connect with small businesses and to look at green job possibilities. And I'm wondering if there was anybody else who was in that session, either of those two, who wanted to add any comments to any notes that we've summarized. That being said, it's been a great morning, and I've heard some great comments, and I hope that you will continue to participate with us in various forums that we have throughout the year on all of these issues and new issues. And feel free to contact me directly or anyone on the staff if you have any further questions. We will be posting the notes on the Economic Summit website that we have. So thank you very much for being here today. It was my pleasure to host this event. Thank you.